Hey guys. Wow, so this is definitely the biggest audience of designers and developers I've danced on stage to. So thanks for that, Dot. I think we'll make you pay for that in the after party. Monese is a banking service that allows you to open a bank account anywhere in the Eurozone without needing proof of address or credit history. So what I want to talk mostly about is a rebrand project which I led when I first joined Monese, and then I'll talk more about how we've taken that brand and applied it throughout the product design and the interface itself. So hopefully this will be interesting for you. Let's say if you work in a startup or you have a product of your own that you're looking to design and brand, because it's a project that we did completely in-house with just 2 designers. So to give you a bit of background about myself, so I joined Monese 2 years ago when there were just a handful of us in a tiny little room in East London. And since then, we've moved the offices 3 times. We've got about 90 people in the company, and we have over 70,000 customers. In the design team, we're still really small, so we have just 2 product designers and 1 UX researcher. And it's been quite interesting in the way that we work because we've just changed from having dedicated UX designers and dedicated UI designers to now working as full stack product designers who cover the UX and the UI across both the Android and the iOS platforms. So to explain a bit about the problem that we're solving at Monese. So these days, people move around the world more freely than ever before. So you've got people moving from, let's say, Amsterdam to Berlin or London to Athens, all looking to find a better job and to find a better life and so on. All these people need a bank account wherever they want to live so that they can receive their salary and pay their bills and do daily spending just like they would with any other bank that they would use back home. So it can be quite restrictive to open a bank account in a new country, and this is for a few reasons. Usually because banks want to see proof of address or credit history, and even if you can convince a bank that you meet their criteria, it can still take weeks or even months to open an account. So Norris Koppel, who's the founder of Monese, experienced this problem firsthand when he moved to the UK from Estonia. Whilst he had really good credit history in Estonia, it wasn't recognized by UK banks and he wasn't able to open an account. So this is just a problem that he really wanted to solve, and that's why he came up with the idea for Monese. So imagine that you've just moved to the UK or any other Eurozone country. You'll need a bank account. All you have to do is go to the App Store and download Monese, go through our fast onboarding, which can take around 3 minutes to complete. Send us a photo of your ID or your passport, take a selfie of yourself, fill in some details, and you can open an account. It's as simple as that. You'll get a UK account number and sort code, or an EU IBAN and BIC, depending on if you're in the UK or the rest of the EU. So all you have to do is give these details to your employer, and you'll receive your salary. You'll get a contactless MasterCard debit card that you can use anywhere in the world. So when we started the project, we just launched on Android, and we were starting to see the customer base grow. And launching on iOS was going to be our next step. But whilst we had an existing identity, we didn't want to kind of invest all the time designing and developing the product on iOS with a brand that we knew wasn't right and just wasn't really set up for scale. And at the time of the project, there was only 2 of us on the design team, so we knew that a rebrand was going to be a real stretch for us. But given that we didn't have that many users and we were planning to grow quite quickly, it was pretty much kind of now or never that we decided to rebrand. So here's a few elements of the previous Monese brand. So in the top left, we've got the original logo. So whilst it's like a really recognizable logo, it didn't feel very ownable. It was a bit too simple. It felt a little bit childish with these very over-rounded, kind of over-friendly forms. And we actually called it the sausage, because it kind of looked a little bit like a sausage. It also kind of jarred with these angular backgrounds that we often used behind it, which kind of were making a bit of inconsistency across the brand. And you can also see this in the debit card in the top right. And some of the early customer feedback that we had of this debit card was that customers didn't feel that it was kind of trustworthy enough. It didn't feel like a legitimate banking card. So this is something that we really wanted to address because we needed customers to feel just safe using Monese on a day-to-day basis. Then in the bottom right, we've got the original Android app. So it was a nice app. One of the issues with it was that we were overusing cards a lot within the UI when we didn't really have a good reason to use cards. So what this was doing was just creating less space for us to actually house elements, and it was causing a bit of clutter. And then in the illustration style, we often use these really angular forms, which again kind of clashed with the rounded forms of the logo and also the more rounded forms of the brand and text typeface that we're using at the time. So we started off the project with a process called brand storyboarding. And this is something that I learned from an InVision article where you can basically get a template and just fill it in online. And it just really helps you kind of think through the stages of what a user, the interactions that a user has with your product from start to finish. So starting off with who they are and the problems that they need solving, and then looking at why our product's best for them, and then what they can now achieve with our product. So from this, we found that our brand story was all about helping customers to level up with their own lives by providing them with the essential financial tools that they need to do this with. And then looking on just to define some early brand values. So this is actually a really important step because at the start of the project, when you can literally do anything, it just gives you some kind of clear kind of things to judge design decisions against. So the way we did this was connected with everyone in the business and just asked them to give us 3 values that they think really represent Monese. And then we just distilled them down into these 3 top values, which are progressive, human, and trustworthy. So progressive being that at Monese, we're always looking to the future to stay one step ahead in terms of our technology and the way that we serve our customers. Human, in that we're non-judgmental with who we onboard, which sets us apart from a lot of other banks. And then trustworthy, in that we provide a safe home for your money. And we're always here to answer questions that anyone might have for customers. So in the early days, these just really kind of provided a base camp that we could circle back to for validation of any ideas that we were coming up with. So whatever we would create, we would just make sure that it aligns to these values, really. And then we started looking at design sprints. So mood boarding at first, just focusing in on those values. Starting off looking at some really kind of abstract art, looking at futurism and constructivism, artists like Kandinsky and Alexander Rodchenko, and just really looking at the abstract art expressions of what the word progressive really means, which is one of our top values. And in these, there's some really interesting color combinations and compositions going on, and they're just clearly not generated by computers or computer software, just the expressions of those really legendary artists. And then looking at some more unusual, rounded, more structures with quite a modular feel. So the one on the left really reminds me of something called Struct, which is basically like an online tool that you can use to create your own fonts with these little modular bricks. And when you piece them together, you can create these really nice structures. And then on the right, these fluid-like kind of modular structures, and the way that they connect with these little curves really has like quite an interactive look about it. So this is something that we really wanted to explore further. And then, so looking at the challenge of how do you show motion or interaction within a single image. So this is one of the favorites that we pulled out from the mood boards, which is a Rio logo type by an Argentinian designer called Esteban Ibarra, if I can say it rightly. So it's got just these really flowing lines, and the way that the lines kind of change color with these gradient blends almost looks like it's got kind of hotter and colder parts to it, which also makes it feel very lifelike. And you can see it in the kind of dot of the eye. It really looks like it's just kind of quickly wiggled, and it's like you just want to be able to drag them around yourself and kind of interact with them. And then moving on to looking at actual drawing machines. So it's amazing how these mechanical things can just express these really beautiful forms. So these forms are essentially just individual lines, but once they start following a pattern or an algorithm, they have this really expressive form. And I think it's a really good way of just communicating how a network can have its own expressive form. So then focusing in on these big rounded shapes that are similar to what we had in that original sausage logo. So we just thought that these rounded shapes were actually really kind of friendly and had quite a nice, unthreatening human feel to them. And we had a lot of brand equity that we'd built up in that original sausage. So we needed to keep investigating it further. And the one on the right really triggers your imagination as to how these shapes could also animate freely on their joins. They almost look like kind of living organisms that could kind of wiggle around and be very lifelike as well. And then looking at how these shapes could represent movement in a single direction. So the one on the left has almost got like a kind of Doppler shift effect of how the shape has changed color as it's moved from one side to the other really quickly. And you can see it as well on the right, where it's like a right-hand swipe smudge with this intact circle that's really just traveled, like a kind of light streak, which again, they both have a really interactive and animated look to them. So looking back to the ideas that we had in the drawing machines and looking at ways of representing a network, a moving network with these larger chunky shapes too. Just looking at patterns of connecting lines and looking at how they could interact and cross over one another just to represent that network in motion within a static image. So then we start looking at this idea called interaction branding. So this is essentially an idea of stemming your brand system from an interaction that users have with your product. So then the brand becomes more than just a way of identifying the company, but actually starts to determine the behavior of the product itself. So as a banking service, one of the biggest features that we have is, well, one of the most used features that we have is the ability just to make a payment. So we decided to focus on this interaction and try and make this a core feature of the brand. So after looking at a few other explorations, we then looked at how we can show these as kind of payment lines, and as they swipe across, they reveal these brand kind of trailing colors. And then we looked at each response of this in more detail, so looking at things like taps, swipes, holds, and releases, and just looking at exactly how this thing could react, just trying to get some really nice motion into it so that it also feels like it's got some life into it too when it's moving. And then we created a front-end prototype using a GreenSock animation platform, which is a JavaScript library that's really great for animating, basically. And we just tested out how this thing could work and feel. It was pretty buggy around the edges, but it worked just well enough to kind of give out to people and see if they can use it. And this is a demo of the final interaction that we settled on. So we really wanted to keep it really nice and simple for the users, just creating this vertical swipe that goes from the transaction amount to the recipient's name. And these big kind of rounded, chunky shapes also pay a bit of homage to what we had in that sausage logo to begin with. But we didn't want to carry on calling it the sausage, so we came up with the name of wormage for it, which I won't try and say in Greek, because I wouldn't be able to do that at all. So it took us quite a long time to get to the final logo mark. We'd been given a design restraint that the logo still needed to be a really recognizable M for Monese. So whilst the sausage logo wasn't very ownable for us, because it was too simple, it was still really recognizable. So basically, we just carried around these notebooks on us all the time, and after a few weeks of sketching M's, we were all going absolutely mad. But eventually, we honed down our preferred choice and started kind of refining the proportions of it and testing out on smaller screens and stuff until we were happy with it. And this is the completed mark. So we decided on this combination of flowing and interconnecting lines that form this more ownable mark that we feel feels secure, dynamic, and has quite a nice human feel to it as well. So these lines basically communicate the continuous progress of payments through the Monese platform whilst overlapping each other to form this secure network. So we also chose to round the corners of the mark to keep it consistent with the FF mark typeface that we chose, so just to keep it consistent with all those rounded forms. So when looking at defining the color palette, we really wanted to create a strong color pairing. So when you think about, obviously, all the kind of most famous brands in the world, they usually have just two colors that go together really well, or sometimes three, but sometimes just even one. And when you think of that color or that pairing, you just know it's that brand straight away. Well, we also just wanted to make sure that it wasn't taken by any of the competitors. So we created this thing called a competitor mood board, or a brand landscape, where we basically just made a massive artboard in Sketch, threw all the examples of the competitors in, and when you start kind of scrolling around it and looking at it, you can see how your colors fit into it, and if they still stand out and represent your values. So we tried out loads of different combinations in this way until we came up with a set that we felt really kind of punched out in the landscape and were really recognizable as Monese. So then we started looking at how we can push the wormage that we created in the payment interaction and make it work more as a visual system. So trying to basically create a graphic device that we could use on all the other brand material. So we explored this way of creating these graphic textures over the dark background for the debit card. So looking at how these wormage lines could work on a thinner scale, forming these large network of trailing lines that could communicate multiple payments in motion through the network. And then for the final composition, we really wanted to make sure that it still had almost like a snapshot of motion, so you can still see that it's almost moving within that static image. And we also used what's called a colored core. So it means that the PVC of the debit card is just basically colored. So when you see it in your wallet vertically, you just know it's Monese straight away. And then for the Euro card, we explored a reversed version, so that if you have both the UK and the Eurozone account, then you can tell in your wallet instantly which card you're using. So from then, we found that cropping into this white network, we can create a bigger range of expressions. So from being very measured and precise when they're zoomed out and really thin, so then being quite bold and expressive when they're really zoomed in and really nice and chunky. So for the debit card packaging, we wanted to basically have these wormage lines really kind of wrapping around the packaging and then going on to the inside as well. So that then when you slide it out, you have this welcoming tab which you then fold over to reveal the debit card, which is in its own kind of cutaway housing. So it's a bit nicer than receiving your card with these kind of glue dots that you often get from a normal bank. And then we started looking at how we could expand this system across the app interface. So one of the elements that we first looked at was in this green scrubbable graph line. So basically, we wanted to create a nice curving line that is similar in form to that line of the logo. And to do this, we had to just make sure that the interpolation's right, so that which is basically how the line kind of plots over time, just making sure that it's wiggly enough to look really nice, but also really accurately represent the user's balance data as well. And then with the loader, just trying to get some nice kind of fluid motion into it to try and make it look as though it's almost got some gravity where it kind of rolls over and then kind of tips on itself. So it's almost like it's just getting heavy at that point. And this was before something called Lottie had been invented by Airbnb, which is basically a way of getting animation data in JSON out of After Effects. So, I mean, all we had to do is just work closely with development, just providing them with the specific trim values of each path line over time. And then looking at also some other color combinations of it for destructive red buttons and also for more primary filled buttons when it's reversed. And then looking at more ways to get this wormage into the app interface. So one of the first screens that you're presented with when you open the account is the passcode screen. So you have those dots that show the progress of the passcode entry. And we just use the wormage to basically connect these dots and then animate seamlessly into the loader so that the process becomes one fluid line that leads you on to the next step. And then another really simple way we brought the wormage in is within the iOS widget. So we basically just show a little peek of the wormage coming in, and it really helps, especially if you've got the widget next to loads of other app widgets. You can tell instantly, oh, that's Monese. And then another way is we brought it into the what's called the video selfie. So the video selfie essentially just adds an extra layer of protection against fraudsters. So we ask the customers to read out a short sentence about themselves, just to make sure that it's actually them there and it's their voice. And we use the wormage line here just to show how well the app's kind of recognizing their voice so that they know it's being recorded. And then we also made our own character style that we call Moneses. So these friendly little guys, we try not to use them too much because then the app becomes a bit too playful, but they can be really, really good for kind of explaining a bit more about what's going on a screen to the user. So here's a few examples. And basically just having one of these friendly little chaps just like showing kind of instantly what that screen's about just helps people, especially if they're less tech savvy, just to know and understand what's going on. And it just really helps to make the app feel more friendly and a bit more lighthearted. And we sometimes use these guys to entertain too. So one of the ways we do this is at the end of onboarding, where we need to scan people's documents on the server and do some analyzing of them. We have one of these guys basically pop himself into the scanner and come out with this nice little spray tan and then wander off all happy. So we just hope that this would almost give like a reward for waiting and make the process feel a little less dull, as if you would have like a normal loader sitting there. So this is another example of when you're exporting a bank statement. It can take a little bit of time to generate it on the server and then download it. So it's like almost like a Monese's eye view, as though he's tapping away on the calculator and shuffling the abacus around and generating that statement manually for you. And another one is in waiting for Facebook verification. So again, instead of showing a more blank screen with a simple loader, we show this cycling through Monese's profile images. So each one's kind of tipping their hat to you or giving you a wave or kind of doing a crazy jumping dance. Okay, so the main thing that we had in terms of results is actually a 70% reduction in our CPA cost, which is essentially how much it costs us to onboard a user. So obviously this went down dramatically, which was really good, but it wasn't just down to the rebrand. It was because we redesigned the app as well and the website. So what we found is that customers, they don't just kind of click on a banner and then go to the App Store and download Monese. People really like to kind of do their homework a bit and read more about us on the website, on the blog, or on online articles. And if any one of these touch points is not consistent with the rest of them, it can kind of really sway people's judgment. So, lastly, it's really just given us a much stronger foundation in terms of design to carry on building this system and improving it and changing it. And it's just made us feel much more confident about our design process, basically, going forward. So I'd just like to say, yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure coming down and talking to you all and seeing what summer actually should be like. Cheers.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much. I've just been making actual notes for myself what we've got to do HSBC on Monday. That's really, really super engaging. Thank you. I suppose one thing that I've seen, I'm just having a quick look to see if there's any other questions coming in. But see, one thing that I've seen lately is the importance of getting a brand and getting its values and actually linking it into the design.
Yeah.
Whereas before that, designers would just, well, not just, but they would do something based on kind of personal preference of what they thought was correct. And what's your process for kind of, I mean, you've kind of showed it already, but I guess, have you done that for a long time, of getting values, linking it to the principles?
Well,
how did you learn to do principles, for example?
Well, no, I mean, I didn't have a...
It's really super solid, the whole foundation all the way through.
I mean, I guess we just did a lot of research, really.
Yeah.
Just making sure that we looked at lots of other kind of rebrand processes and made sure that we did it right, because it was kind of like, if we're going to do it, let's do it properly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, things like, defining the brand values, like as a designer, you can think that might be a bit boring and stuff, but yeah, like I said, it's really important. And one thing that we really want to focus on was creating that system. So yeah, like you said, a lot of people, they just kind of, we'll create a color palette or we'll do a few kind of elements and modules and then, we've got a brand. But it doesn't really have that thing that ties in across, well, it's not like a strong foundation, really.
Yeah.
So we wanted to create, more of a system for it, which...
I think what was nice as well, is when you get those brand values and you start linking it into modern art, and you start making the visual association, and immediately as a designer it becomes more interesting, those values.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I think so.
Okay.
Any more questions?
I don't think so. I think that's it. So, thank you very much.
No, cheers. Yeah,
Brilliant.
thanks. It's been really good.
Thank you.
Cheers.